A couple of the questions that I'd encourage folks to think about during the conversation is, firstly, frankly, what are the capabilities we want from an open data system? What are they? When will they be available at its core? And then, really, some of the issues with regards to this sort of system have probably been thought out fairly well already, but there's probably lots of areas that need much deeper dives and much closer thought. And that could be some technical stuff. It could be issues around leadership and governance. It could be issues around business models and sort of engagement. So I think thinking about those will be key. And then maybe last thought for me, unsurprisingly, this is also an area where the tech industry is overlapping pretty heavily. I mean, we've probably all bumped into the big AI companies who are operating in this space, either for providing the equivalent of foundational data systems or tools and technologies. But I have a question about how we productively engage with those folks, and what are the gives and gets or the asks that we have of those firms. So just some starters for 10 in terms of questions. But that's it for me. A very warm welcome, and I'll pass over to John to get the show on the road. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Tarek. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just put in the chat box an email address that if you have thoughts about any of those points that Tarek raised, you can send them in so that they can be digested in anticipation of the next call. When we wrap up today, I'll just foreshadow what we're currently thinking of as an agenda and at least 2 documents that we're proposing to circulate to you to get you thinking. And if you have any other reactions to that agenda, let us know. So if you could just send in any reflections to info@evidensic.org, as you'll see in the chat box, that would be great. Today, we're going to go back to the same speakers that we heard from last time. The remit on the first touch point was, where are we now? And the remit today was, where would we like to be and by when? And you'll have seen in the agenda and background document, they were given the same list of 5 bullet points of some of the issues that had been coming up in previous calls or inside conversations, where we thought that one or more of them may want to touch on one or more of the things in that list. So they've seen that list in advance, but for each of them, they're going to speak to their respective vantage points. So James, as one of the key players in an evolving open data system in this space, then Lawrence and Rona speaking about perspectives from the Global South, and then Carla speaking from the perspective of the CEO of one of the largest or the largest evidence synthesis producing network globally. So each will have unique vantage points on this issue of where do we want to be by when. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to James.
There we go. Thank you, John. I think I'm now not on mute. So what I'll do now is share the slides. Hopefully that's worked. Slides showing okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so my brief is where we anticipate being and by when with existing investments. So there are a number of projects which are part of what I'm going to talk about here. And some of this obviously is around vision, and some of it's sort of quite detailed around what we're currently building and what our plans are with that. So hopefully I can advance my slides. Great. So I'm going to go a very, very quick recap just to sort of flashpoints, remind you what I went through last time, and then I'm going to cover where we anticipate them being. And then John sent me a list of capabilities that he was interested in our thoughts on in terms of how we mapped against the capabilities for the open data system. So I'm going to cover that at the end. So this is going to be quick recap, so I apologize for those of you who didn't see it last time because it will be very quick. So what we're building within these projects has an overall objective really of enabling people to discover, use and add diverse evidence. So really importantly, discover the evidence, use the evidence and then contribute to the evidence base. And the organizations involved and some of the partners on this have been doing these things for a number of years. And so what we're finding ourselves doing is sort of pooling resources, pooling the various code bases that we've got in order to develop this connected system. And what we're wanting to do is sort of build it from the ground up as a sort of like an industry standard, very robust system for storing and using and contributing to data. So you can see some of the principles there: delivering the data, empowering those traditionally excluded from power, being driven by very much user needs, using and harnessing the capability of AI, but also being cognizant of its limitations. And we're very much focused on evidence for synthesis. So we're not wanting to sort of duplicate repositories of the whole of science. This is evidence for decision making. So at its heart is a living evidence repository, which is very much what we've been focusing on building. As you might expect in a repository, you have data coming into the repository, and you have the use of the data, which in our case is the evidence use. And then we've got a number of enhancements which happen to the data. So very quickly move on. The evidence repository itself is built up of increasing numbers of these projects that you can see here. I won't go through them all in detail, but Destiny is sort of the project where this has started, but then we've got other projects now which are looking to sort of build their own repositories within this larger living evidence repository. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that we've got a repository which intentionally will have everything in it that we want, or we might want, for decision making in the specified domains. But a repository might be very large. So the Destiny repository is upwards of 100,000 records, or a repository might be as small as an individual living systematic review. So there's lots and lots of different sort of variations, all that will sort of denote membership of one repository as a sort of little tag against a record. So there may be 500,000 records in the repository, and some of them will belong to one or more repositories themselves. So what we're building at the moment is the ingestion of records from different data sources. And importantly here, once we've got records into the repository, we enhance the record by getting abstracts for those that we're interested in, getting full text reports for those that we're very interested in, and storing the information that we extract from them, being very mindful of making sure that we follow all the relevant copyright laws. And on the left here, we've got the interaction, the human in the loop between humans and AI systems, which take the data as reported from studies and interpret it, classify it according to taxonomies, extract data, which can then all be stored in the repository itself. And I'm not going to talk through the detail of this one because I'll leave that for you if you want to look at the detail of this, but this shows the sort of like the movement of a record through various enhancements to then taking annotations from the transferability model developed by eBase. So once we've got data in the repository with lots of granular information, obviously then it needs to be used. There are various APIs under development there. There's a search interface and discovery interface there. The aim to being obviously that this then gets integrated within evidence synthesis platforms, which many of you have used, I'm sure, and also the ability to bulk export and have snapshots of the data set for people who want to essentially take a whole snapshot of the whole data set. The whole thing is open source, so you could potentially spin up your own. This is just an example of the dashboard that we've currently got, showing the number of records, the fact that the records are coming in. This is a slide from last time, but there'll be more records since then. The number of enhancements, sort of like the number of tags put against the records, and the fact that we've got a taxonomy that we're using to describe them. So the core building blocks are in place, and I've gone through it very fast because this is what I covered last time. It's open source, so you can go and look at all of the documentation. There's a software development kit to help people to interact with it. So there's lots still to do, but we're very excited about it. So in terms of where we're planning to be, we're expecting to be within the existing investments. And there are a number of investments here: Destiny, Jacobs, Metius, Solis, Galenos are some. And essentially what we're expecting to develop in the next couple of years will be living repositories supporting all of these different projects. So supporting the 4 sectoral hubs, for example, in Metius, and climate and health within Destiny and Solis AI, mental health within Galenos, etc. We're expecting to have daily updates. We already have daily updates from OpenAlex going through the various machine learning models, but then also additional data sources added as each project user group sort of kicks off and says we need additional sources. And also then data sharing, so being able to ingest already extracted data from the Education Endowment Foundation 3IE, What Works Global Education Hub, for example, and then also support of mapping taxonomies. So these sets of data come with their own sort of their own particular taxonomies. What we want is the ability to sort of map the concepts between them so that you can have a sort of like a central view of the data coming from different organizations. At the moment, we're hosted in Sweden. We had a little exercise at the beginning of the project where we looked for the lowest carbon emissions that we could find, and the Swedish data center was the one. Critically, what we're working on and what we're continually and what we will be working on over the next year in particular will be onboarding the new projects. At the moment, the Destiny repository is the Destiny repository, but we're expecting several new projects to begin and start having their own repositories within this data set. And so we're thinking and working on how we support people to scope a new repository, to know what the boundaries are, what should be in, what shouldn't be in, how we're going to create them, how accuracy for the content should be evaluated in different ways, and also then how those repositories then downstream can then be integrated into new tools. And we're mindful that we don't have a governance structure, and we're also mindful that we need one. So that's one of the sort of the snapshots of where we are at the moment. And an example here, in the second half of 2025, which is now, we're looking at ingesting already extracted synthesis-ready data from different holders of those data, and with automatic deduplication of references within the repository as one of the sort of the milestones we're reaching this half of the year. And then next year, looking to be mapping those extracted data against a harmonized taxonomy, searching and export for data reuse for those. And also we're doing some research on semantic searching, so-called vector searching, so using some machine learning and large language models to help with the search interface. And then we're looking at later next year, data description and mapping using sort of open data formats. So that's what we're currently working on. I think what I then wanted to just to sort of talk to you very quickly is what I see and what we see as the sort of like the responsibility of the repository as opposed to the responsibility of all the other services which we can't build them all ourselves, which will sort of interoperate with it. So the repository itself does some core work. It sort of reads data in, and it sort of looks after that data, and it enables people to interact with the data. So fundamentally, the repository takes data in from the different data sources. It will do some particular tasks around identification of abstracts and full text and deduplication, which makes sense for a core repository to be doing. But actually, what we see is those are the core tasks of the repository itself. You'll see I've not even highlighted the AI-enabled enhancements here, which are part of the projects, but they're not part of the sort of like the core responsibility of the project, of the repository. What I'm seeing is that for all of those different projects that we've got there, and no doubt some which we don't know yet, the enhancement robots and the human in the loop work can essentially take place anywhere. They don't necessarily have to take place in the Swedish data center. They can take place anywhere in the world, and they can also be paid for by anyone anywhere else in the world. And that's kind of the model that we're starting to sort of settle on in order to sort of manage the responsibilities between a central deposit and a repository of data, and then all of the quite computationally expensive work that might happen in terms of AI-enabled enhancements and that kind of thing. So those are what we think of as third parties. Different projects will be responsible for their own AI-enabled enhancements. They'll all be open source, the ones that we're developing, of course, so people can then build on them. But I think it's useful to have that division of responsibility between the data storage and the serving of the data and the enhancements of the data and the use of the data. Just to illustrate that a little bit for you, I've got here the story of a new paper. So we've got a new paper coming in from OpenAlex. up on the top left here, and then it's processed by a number of repositories. They're probably going to be all of the repositories in the data set will be really interested in new papers that come in, and they'll want to assess whether or not they're relevant. So there'll be an automated system calling lots and lots of different robots, not necessarily in Sweden, as I said, anywhere around the world they could be, and then the relevance will be then stored in the repository. So it may be then flagged as of interest. And here I've got sort of like yellow highlight because there at that point we will use repository responsibilities to identify the abstract and full text if necessary. Then again, those records will go through potentially other human in the loop and AI workflows to extract data and other types of metadata, and those will then be stored in the repository. And then over on the left-hand side here, I've got sort of a desk. We might use that in an evidence synthesis, a conventional evidence synthesis. Down on the bottom here, we've got maps. Those records then might appear in maps, and the APIs will serve those mapping applications. But it's not the responsibility of the repository to build all the mapping applications. It will simply serve the data to people who want to build them. And then on the bottom right-hand side there, other databases, like I said, the snapshots, but also through API, the possibility of linking records in this repository to other repositories. So hopefully that wasn't too quick, and it's sort of giving you an overview of that. But then what I was going to finish with was John's table, which just takes us through some of the capabilities listed. So we're building and have got underway the ability, for example, pulling in data from OpenAlex, etc., and having sector taxonomies label things up. And expanding to additional platforms is something which is underway. It's something which will be very much dependent on the sort of like the platforms on a case-by-case basis to be built in. Expanding to all 11 sectors, that we don't have projects for those at the moment. The capability is there for the repository and the sort of like the models for the enhancements. Onboarding at the moment, we're sort of learning as we go, so we'll have to look at capacity on that. Expanding enhancements for other contexts and hubs, capabilities there. And I think that's where the division of labor between a central repository and then the enhancements will be useful in terms of thinking that there's an awful lot of this open data system which doesn't actually need to be a core responsibility of a repository. It can be built and the data deposited in the repository, but not necessarily built by the repository itself. I'm not going to comment on every single one because otherwise I'll take too much time. But these slides will be available afterwards. So if you want to look in the detail of them and look at this, like the detail of the capabilities, then you can. But basically, we've got a situation where the capability of linking to other repositories is there. At the moment, we don't have concrete plans, for example, building out from Prospero, but the capability is there. The support for additional platforms containing process synthesis data, absolutely, that we see that as a core responsibility of the repository. But analytics will happen somewhere else. So policy scale AI-enabled living evidence synthesis is something that I'm very interested in and doing active thinking about. And I see the repository as storing the data which will enable that. But the analytical capabilities will be in multiple downstream tools, I'm sure, which will be utilized in different ways for different contexts. So APIs, I've talked about them already. Most of that is either already built or part of the sort of like the plans. Interesting question on translation, whether or not that should be sort of thought of as an enhancement or thought of as a core task of the repository. Interestingly enough, on copyright, we've had advice that we can't sort of take a copyrighted PDF, translate it into another language and then store that. Apparently that's still against sort of the copyright law. And I think probably I don't want to overrun my time. So I think I might stop there, John, unless there's any specific questions.
I think that's amazing, James. Can I just check, does anybody have any burning questions? We're hoping to keep the discussion to the end, but are there important questions of clarification for James about where they anticipate being by when? Excellent. Thank you so much, James. And thank you for responding so quickly to the those capabilities and mapping out what you see as being in scope and not. Can we go to Gabrielle quickly, and then we'll move on to Lawrence and Rona? And if you haven't noticed it, Lawrence posted in the chat box a link where they've captured in about a 20-minute video a number of insights from partners across the Global South about what they would like to see in the repository, how they imagine using it. So please do consider taking the time to watch that video afterwards. Gabrielle, can we go to you?
Thank you, John. Thanks, James, for the presentation. I think it's very clear. And well, as I mentioned in the previous meeting, I'm very concerned, and my question is, how much have you checked with other organizations, especially those based in the Global South or aiming the Global South? I'm thinking of Bireme, PAHO, CRIAE, and Epistemónicos, that this work is not overlapping what they are doing. I'm speaking from the point of view of Epistemónicos. We have a system that is doing exactly what you are describing, and is in a very advanced position, and it can be a complementary project, of course. But my question is how much work you have done to scope who is doing something similar, and how that work can be integrated so this project can build upon existing initiatives, and of course not disempower what the Global South is already doing at this moment.
Okay, I think, lots of us have got I have exactly this system as well. There are quite a few of us that have got living evidence synthesis systems, which are reading data in, doing machine learning processing, and storing the data and using taxonomies. And I think the difference with this compared with what we've got currently is that we're kind of separating out very, very explicitly the capability of storing and being a sort of like a living data ingestion system and serving, at industry scale, the number of records and the number of requests that we'll get from all of the enhancement work and the AI work. So, I know all of the. I don't know them all. I'm very aware of a lot of other projects, and I've looked at as much source code as I'm able to. And I'm pretty convinced in terms of open source projects that there is no other open source project which is building it in this way, which is designed as being an extensible project like this. And so, and the reason that I talked about that division of responsibilities so much is that most of the work of this isn't the responsibility of the repository at all. It's the enhancements, and that gives huge opportunities for lots and lots of people then to basically write their own robots, write their own human-in-the-loop processes, but utilize the sort of like the basic infrastructure, which is something which I think has been really missing from the whole field. I've been in this field for a long time, and I've always wanted to have something like this, which ingests data and gives me a living feed of data across the whole of research, which is where we work at scale, and something which is just supportive of then downstream applications of sorry, go you hand up.
Yeah, sorry. No, yeah, I completely agree with you. There is no existing system doing that. My question is, how much connection have you had with these organizations to check that we are not building the same in parallel? That's my feeling now. You have maybe 2, 3, 4 organizations, at least 3 in the Global South that including Epistemónicos, that are working together or having conversations in this direction, that are building this system and are in a very advanced position. And there are several projects using this infrastructure, even though it is not an open system with all the intersectional characteristics that you're describing. I completely agree that it would be needed to scale up anything that is in an earlier stage. But are you in connection with any of these Global South organizations, or this is something that has not yet arrived to the stage that can be, I don't know, discussed or explored in terms of collaboration with other organizations?
James, do you want me I'm worried about time and we have a lot of other issues to go through. I think, Gabrielle, Tarek has flagged to you that like you and any other groups, if you believe there is something else that has been missed that ticks these boxes, an open source platform with all these capabilities, a modular approach that allows easy extension to other sectors, this scale of existing funding, then, as Tarek indicated, Welcome is very, very keen to hear about that. So we would just encourage you. You also mentioned Breme, they're on the call. That's the purpose of these touch points, is to understand, are we missing anything? And then to work out what that means for the next steps. James, correct me if I'm wrong, 3IE is very much involved in these discussions.
Yep.
It's one of the platforms with whom you're working. Great. Lawrence, you have your hand up, but you're up next. Are you okay if we transition to you and Rona?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll use that as a transition because I know, James, we've talked a lot, and maybe you didn't want to overclaim, but in many of the existing investments like Meteors, like Destiny, some of the Global South partners, we were involved in the scoping for this, like Pace, Acres, eBase, Cesta, so a few of the colleagues that we have these individual videos from. And I think it's fair to say that from our joint assessment, it did feel like that's a genuine gap, and that in particular in those existing investments, that I think the outreach there has been very equitable and a good foundation to get going. And I'm happy to move into the next slot, but I see, John, I think there's another hand that just came up from Ludovic.
Ludovic, could you just go really briefly? We have two more.
Yeah, this is a follow-up question. So maybe we should have a specific discussion on this, because at Pajo and Tiago is here connected. He's the person working with OpenAlex for more than a year now. So we know very well this database, and we have been putting all the information from OpenAlex and creating a number of products related to using OpenAlex, and other databases. So I think that we need to have a mechanism to really incorporate the views of others, because otherwise we're going to be working on, in silos. That's I think it's an important point, the one that has been made by Gabriel. Thanks.
So it sounds like it would be helpful to have a side conversation. If I'm understanding the two of you correctly, the key players would be, in addition to James and team from Latin America and the Caribbean, would be Breme, and at least on the first call we had the director, Gabrielle and Ludovic. Does that make sense as a very targeted side conversation among others?
Yeah, if it's OpenAlex, if the basis is OpenAlex, maybe it's with us, and we can invite Bireme as well. But we have been working with Tiago specifically with OpenAlex for a while now.
Yeah, with Tamara's comment, we would be covering everybody that Gabrielle originally identified. So it happens that 3 of the 4 are in Latin America. So in addition to James' team, so that's a concrete action item that we'll follow up on. Lawrence, could we transition to your and Rona's cross-cutting perspectives? You've been speaking to many counterparts across the Global South. The video brings their individual voices, but I think the two of you have a more joined up presentation.
Yeah, sure, fantastic. So let me get my slides up quickly. And maybe just a very quick, because I know we've moved on quite fast, but James, I think 2 things. It's really exciting to see how some of the language in the slides will be reflected in our slides just now. And I certainly love the elephant, so I think that's lovely. I'm much looking forward to seeing more of those. And John, thanks for already flagging in the chat that we have some more granular voices, and you see them here on the slides. Rona and I will try to give you the very rapid synthesis collective voice on the Global South leadership perspective on the open data system. And I'll try to be extra brief because I know we're a bit behind time. And I think this links to some of the earlier discussion that just came out. For us, thinking back to the first call, it feels really key to emphasize that we have this positive shared tradition of technology development in our evidence synthesis community, and that this is a history of collaboration between the Global South and Global North, which has led to a situation where most of us have access to tools and systems to do evidence synthesis and data creation. And so I think we're sitting here having access, which is a really good story, because in other sectors, that's not the case. At the same time, we also need to acknowledge that we have structural inequalities at a global scale that leave our community, the evidence synthesis community, also having an unequal playing field. And I think to the points mentioned, if we look across by and large, we would say that the large synthesis text systems and data repositories are still based in the global north. And where we see a really big opportunity with ESIC in particular is as a collective voice to make ours a slightly more equal playing field, but importantly, without throwing out this really positive history of shared technology development and collaboration. So that remains our North Star, our guiding principle. And so building on that tradition, when we consulted and thought across, well, what are our key needs? And I think here, James, I'm really excited about how some of the language aligns. What we heard loud and clear is that there's less appetite for a single global open data repository and a much stronger appetite for a form of federated repositories that then can connect these, with the ability to carbon copy these federated repositories into our sectors, into our context. And if we talk about carbon copying, particularly around the technology powering the repositories and non-proprietary data and the enhancements to that data, and acknowledging here briefly important safeguards to think about. I won't go into detail on that. But it is really about, we are located in different regional and sectoral contexts, and having the ability to take something from the global, carbon copy it, and then use that as a basis to serve our constituencies. And the second key point that comes out strongly as a need for us is that we then have some form of shared governance structure between some form of main global repository and then the carbon copies or associated repositories, so that we share across the learnings, enhancements on either side. And if we talk about where to focus new investments, we would say, well, currently we have the vast majority of the repositories remain in the global north. So let's look into focusing on carbon copies in the global south. So that's slightly in techie language. My day-to-day is much more of an evidence broker or evidence intermediary in South Africa. And so if I bring this quickly in intermediary language, what we talk about is we probably don't have demand strongly for a single evidence system, but for connected data and evidence system. And James, I think I saw a very similar language on your slide. And was with that connected system, then the ability to adapt that, the technology of it, the data, to serve up products in sectoral and regional, national and subnational context to our decision makers. Where there probably is a big gap in terms of how could we deliver on that is twofold. So the first is we seem to be lacking a business model for that both rewards historic data curation and enhancements, and at the same time opens up different revenue streams for us in our context. And I think Rona and I spoke to this in the first call. And secondly, equally important, it does feel that we do need a new partnership model, some form of new venture to deliver on that. And that comes from a feeling that this is not something that a single entity or even a consortium of a few entities could deliver on, that it's generally an all of community effort. And in that spirit, we need a partnership model that reflects that. I know that Rona is online, but Rona, unless something has changed with the network, I hope it's okay if I jump in and do this slide quickly as well. So this is essentially. Yeah, please go ahead. Super, thanks. So this is essentially where our kind of summary to this very specific prompt where we'd like to be, and this is deliberately ambitious. So like acknowledging this full stop. So kind of our temporal marker was the kind of thinking back from the Cape Town consensus and our consensus statement and the associated products like the equity companion. Well, if we take that as a start, we kind of already 6 months or 5 months post, but where would we like to be 1 year Cape Town? So that is the first timeline. And I think for us, that's probably the most ambitious ask. There's a few things in there. The first one, the main thing is around having the ability to test whether we can actually share and adapt the technology within the ESIC aligned projects like Destiny, like Meteor. So if we agree that carbon copying is a good thing to try out, can we within the next 6 months actually try this and see if this works in practice? If we have ESIC regional hubs, that might be a good starting point, but there are groups within different geographies and sectors who otherwise could take the lead on that. But really understanding how difficult, how practical is it, and that we have a good base to know, well, is that something that works fairly seamlessly, or is this something we need to think about more deeply? That should go then together with also identifying some of all the technology companies in our geographies who could lead on hosting some of the carbon copies. And importantly, the point from the previous slide, really thinking deeply about the partnership and governance model. And that feels that we need some additional support. We need legal advice. We need, I think, a lot of thinking through the nitty-gritty of, if you had a new venture, how could that look like? How could this involve the key players in an equitable way, et cetera, et cetera. So it does feel like that we'd need quite a bit of support. The second marker that we put then was around September 2027, and then links back to what we've heard from colleagues within the UN system quite strongly, that the SDGs will be up for deciding that the renewal are being reframed, and that in 2027 there will be a large summit where some of that discussion will be kicked off strongly, and it would be imperative that we have some of the living evidence bases, the policy scale systematic reviews ready for that to inform that process. And that's why we're asking for a slightly ambitious timeline of, can we have up to 10 carbon copies in the Global South ready, with the Global South tech companies and partners leading these. And then a whole like a couple of associated governance issues to think through in detail that I'll just leave in the interest of time. And then the big vision for us by 2020-30 is, of course, to have consolidated the business model fully, to have some consolidated the governance, and think about 20 or so carbon copies around the world. So that's in short where deliberately ambitious we'd like to be. The last slide that I just leave for food for thought, linking back to the individual videos. There has been some thinking around particular high priority tools, so not just at the system level. I don't think we have time for that today, but kind of if you're interested in what's really specific applications or robots, we're particularly interested in, those are some that came up around contextualization, APIs, the language translation point, evidence brokerage, and intermediary support. Yeah, so that's our input, and I'll stop sharing.
Really helpful. Rona, would you add anything else?
No, I think Lawrence has done justice to it. Thank you.
Super, thanks. And Lawrence, can I just check the math? The aspiration with ESIC is that by September 2026, we'd have 11 sectoral hubs, and we would, sooner than that, have 2 regional hubs. So you mentioned 10. And maybe you were just saying we wouldn't quite be there, but are you imagining a model where we would ideally have those 13 covered off, where there was a kind of locally owned one for each of the sectoral hubs and one for the and one for each of the regional hubs?
And I think in short, short answer is yes, and so very happy. The numbers, I think, we try to have fairly tangible targets.
Yes, gotcha. Yeah.
And I would maybe just, whether the regional hubs need to necessarily have their own repository, I think could be a question, but yeah, in principle, that's
okay.
Fully agreed.
Gotcha. Like last time, and again, we only have 20 minutes and we still have one presentation, and then want to open it up for more general discussion. Are there any quick questions of clarification for Lawrence and Rona? And do keep in mind, again, that video is available for folks who want to hear from colleagues across the Global South. Okay, Carla, would you be willing to come in with thoughts from Cochrane?
Sure. Just trying to find the idea. So, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good, because I can't see you when I'm presenting, but I hope that this is okay. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background. I've been asked, and this is the second meeting, to speak on behalf of the Global Evidence Synthesis community. So basically, we are part of that enhancement part that I think that James was mentioning. We spoke in the first meeting. I've provided a little bit of feedback. We collect feedback from three organizations, so this is not by all means comprehensive. But Campbell has been able to move much faster, and an aligned process and roadmap. JBI has a very, very diverse numbers of topics and methods. So they are actually meeting next week to discuss how they will move in terms of the open data and reuse. Cochrane has the building blocks, but because our database is very large, we have over 9,000 evidence synthesis in our database, so this becomes more complex. And we have we need a sustainable long-term model. So this is what we are looking at this point. So we're looking at exploring sustainable models, including how do we pilot the use of AI with human in the loop for our reviews. And we are looking at, we'll talk more about that next time, but we're looking at, creating dashboards that will then, we realize that one of the problems that we have is that we have a very large amount of reviews that are out of date. So this for us is a great opportunity to actually creating living evidence from reviews that already exist. But it's also an opportunity to look at the demand side, prioritize and integration of different softwares. So one of the things that we've done 2 weeks ago, we brought together 200 people from Cochrane, leaders in the community. I know many of you are in the call now, and we had a 2 days discussion of how we integrate technology, AI in our process, and what are actually the priorities for the organization. After this 2 days discussion, we had a 2 days govern board meeting, and I'm going to now mention some of the questions that Tariq asked in the beginning. So we have full support of the leadership. We took a survey after the meeting, and it's 95% of the leadership think that this is a priority for the organization to change the business model and integrate AI in our process. And we have full support from the govern board. That, as many of you know, I was appointed the CEO a little bit more than a month ago, and that is completely the focus of my priority, to identify a sustainable business model. And I'd like to emphasize the sustainability issue, because I think we're working very hard on the, how do we actually transition to AI-enabled living repository, but we have also to think about how do we actually keep it living repository going forward. So I'm less talking about the details of the thing, but how, in terms of leadership and governance, we do need help and advice. Someone mentioned, for example, the issue about copyright. There's a number of legal issues that we are identifying. We're really going to be looking at pilots to be able to identify and be able to scale up. We are very ambitious as well, aiming to scale up the entire library within the next 2 years, maximum 3 years. But actually, I think this is really part of what all of us here are doing, is trying to understand how do we work better together. But I also have some information from my colleagues. So Campbell, and many of us are across a lot of these projects. They had just had a Matthews project that James mentioned, and they want to align with open science principles. And the future actions are mandate actual data sharing, partnering with open publishers, what they have done already, update templates, and adopt the ESIC guidance. JBI, as I mentioned, they are meeting next week to discuss in a more formal way. They do not have a formal business model in terms of data sharing as yet, and their review data is not searchable. they have limited demand to diversity because of the diversity of methods that they operate, and limited at the moment currently incentive to invest in data sharing infrastructure. So I'm going to stop here because I know, John, that we're going to speak next time about more details of things, hands-on things that we are looking at, but happy to answer any question.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Carla. And I saw Will. Zoe, I believe, is traveling or already arrived in India for the big JBI meeting. Will, did you want to add anything as one of the members of the Building a Global Evidence Synthesis community? Will? I didn't give him a heads up, so he may have stepped away to get coffee. Any questions or comments? Oh, Will's in a car. Any questions or comments for Carla? All right, so then let's open it up for discussion. And maybe the only other piece that I'll put into play is one of the things that we would really like to get your feedback on in the discussion and through a follow-up email is how to make the best use of our time in the next touch point. So this is the draft agenda. So far, 2 preparatory documents have been drafted. But we want to get your feedback on, does this make the most sense? And we would get out this draft agenda very quickly, along with the 2 briefing notes that have already been drafted so that people are thinking about this in advance. Key open data system capabilities and related services that are needed. By September, we hope to have 11 sectoral hubs. James has already talked about a plan that will get coverage of a number of those, but there would still 5 be coming online with new funding from the Wellcome Trust. As Carla and others have alluded to, areas where external support is needed. So again, there's a briefing note with 8 forms of advice that may be helpful for people so that they can, in an informed way, participate in discussions about what this looks like in future, but also so that we can get to that final agreement. So that's item 2. Third, how do we approach or support Global South co-leadership? So this is of particular interest to Wellcome, which will be thinking through how it supports Global South co-leadership in all of this. And you'll see that I noted the plan for a specific conversation with Bareme, Epistemonikos, PAHO, and 3IE, which will also happen. And then the last one perhaps can come later. It's just noted here. How do we begin the conversations with all of the organizations and initiatives who may have services, platforms, and other things that they may want to have a conversation about? How do we contribute to this, but also how do we benefit from it? But it feels like there are higher order conversations here needed to sort through up front. So that's a sense of what the agenda could be. Again,
Is it only for me that John froze?
No,
He's gone for me as well.
It closed, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just checking as well. I can see I can't get any audio from Don. Well, maybe while he's reconnecting, I'll just put my hand up to do any moderating. I think I can still see John's screen, but he's teed up some of the options and questions for the next call. But I'll just open the discussion and do a bit of facilitation. I see Peter. Over to you.
Hi, Tariq, and hi, Carla. I'm really interested, Carla, in your vision of the piloting, and in particular, and I know that these calls have been about the open data system, but I think it would be really valuable in call 3 to have a couple of use cases or test questions alongside the data repositories and the capabilities so that we can actually see some use cases that are, and I'm speaking with my demand side hat on because I was in demand side working group. So Carla, maybe, I don't know if you can expand on how you envisage piloting, because I think there's some really interesting questions that come out of how we might, what we would be piloting and testing, and what comparisons and what outcomes we might measure. Thanks.
Yeah, Peter, I had a slide about the pilot, and I was asked to leave it for the next call. We have two options. Either we leave it for the next call, but you and I can catch up, and but that's exactly the idea, is to create mechanisms that we understand what works and what doesn't work. And for us as an organization, how do we actually use AI responsibly, but how do we interact with, James is involved on this, because we want to be able to say, okay, how do we work and increment what is being done by others? So the idea is that, and I think it's probably best if we leave it, because I think that the next call is about solutions, and that's where John asked me to wait.
Yeah, so I